If anyone had told me that my life could twist so fast in a single afternoon, I would have laughed and then probably spilled my coffee. And yet, here I was, standing in the middle of the university dorm courtyard, watching the exact kind of chaos that only a college campus could produce. Students running in all directions, someone yelling about a missing roommate, and a frisbee narrowly missing the back of my head. I hadn't intended to be anywhere near this part of campus, and yet fate or something considerably messier than fate had other plans. The first time I noticed him, he was pacing across the brick pathway, a stack of papers clutched against his chest, brows furrowed in a way that made even the most confident students duck instinctively out of his path. That was the thing about Professor Julian Reed. He commanded attention without asking for it, like a sudden storm that made everyone stop mid-step, even if they had no idea it was coming. I had my own reasons for avoiding authority figures, which usually involved late assignments, oversleeping, and a troubling fondness for mischief. But Julian wasn't just any authority figure. He was the kind who could make your stomach flip by simply glancing at you. I'd heard whispers about him from the upperclassmen, strict, unyielding, borderline terrifying, but there was also something undeniably magnetic beneath that stern exterior, something that didn't sit right with the usual boundaries between student and teacher. Our collision was inevitable. I had tried to dodge a rogue frisbee, tripping over the edge of a brick planter and landing, spectacularly, in a heap at his feet. He looked down at me, papers teetering in his grasp, and I swear I saw the tiniest twitch at the corner of his mouth, a flicker of amusement before his face settled back into the mask of professional composure. "You're lucky I don't have you running laps around the quad for that stunt," he said, voice low, but precise, the kind that left no room for argument. I smiled anyway, brushing grass off my jeans. And missed the chance to meet the legend of Julian Reed in person? Not a chance. He froze, brow raising slightly, and I felt my chest tighten. There it was, the moment I realized that sarcasm didn't protect you here. It only made things dangerously interesting. It didn't take long before our paths crossed again. Julian had been assigned as my academic advisor, an arrangement I suspected was less coincidence and more a maneuver by the university's administrative machinery. They claimed it was to help me thrive, but the truth felt far more complicated. The man was capable of inspiring both dread and fascination, and somehow, I found myself drawn into the orbit of that intensity. The first few meetings were formal, strictly business. He sat behind his polished wooden desk, papers meticulously arranged, and I fidgeted in the chair across from him, trying to mask the way my gaze kept drifting to the curve of his jaw, the way the late afternoon light hit his hair, making it look almost golden. He caught me looking once. I knew because his sharp eyes didn't flicker, they held you, pinned you in place, and for a moment, I considered whether it was professional concern or something else entirely. Then the university sent an unexpected shock my way. I was designated as the temporary guardian for a fellow student's younger sibling, who had been thrust into our dorm system due to family circumstances. The child, only 10, had an uncanny way of observing everything, soaking up details, and asking questions that no adult could answer without stumbling. Somehow, in the bureaucratic shuffle, the responsibility landed on me. And the kicker? Julian Reed was assigned as my co-guardian. I nearly laughed aloud when the email arrived. Me and the sternest, most inflexible professor on campus, partners in child supervision. The situation was absurd, and yet there it was, laying out a new set of rules we had to follow. And if I thought it would be straightforward, I was already a fool. The first day of our joint guardianship was a disaster in every imaginable way. Julian had rules for everything: bedtime routines, dietary restrictions, homework schedules. I had improvised methods that usually ended in chaos. The child, mischievous and unrelenting, found both our weaknesses and exploited them with devilish glee. And somehow, in the middle of this turmoil, Julian and I began to notice each other not just as co-guardians, but as humans navigating unexpected proximity. It started with small things. A glance that lingered too long when we handed the child a snack. A brush of hands while setting up the playroom. A shared laugh at the absurdity of trying to enforce order in a space designed to resist it. I hated myself for thinking about him in that way, even as my heart betrayed me. And Julian, Well, his restraint was impressive, but not infinite. There were moments of softening of his stern gaze, a hand that hovered just a second too long that suggested he felt it too. Late one evening, after a particularly trying day, we found ourselves alone in the dorm lounge. The child had finally fallen asleep, exhausted, and Julian was perched on the edge of a chair, staring out the window at the stars beginning to prick the dark sky. I lingered near the doorway, unsure if I should intrude on this rare moment of quiet. "You know," he said without looking at me, "this is not what I expected when I signed up to teach here." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Neither did I. But maybe some things aren't supposed to be expected." He turned toward me, and for the first time, there was no professor between us, just Julian, the man. His eyes, usually so controlled, were vulnerable, and in that vulnerability was a raw, aching honesty that made my chest tighten. "I don't know how we're supposed to handle this," he admitted, voice low. "The rules, the system, everything. It's all against the way we're feeling." I stepped closer, almost instinctively, my pulse hammering. "Then maybe we stop trying to follow them, just for a moment." The quiet between us stretched, charged with tension and something deeper, something forbidden and beautiful. I realized that the world outside students, rules, obligations had faded entirely. It was just us, standing in a quiet dorm lounge, bound by circumstance, attraction, and the unspoken promise that this connection might just survive the chaos we were navigating. That night marked the beginning of an uncharted path. Our interactions became a delicate dance of rules and rebellion, professionalism and intimacy. The child became an innocent witness to small, tender moments, shared glances, quiet laughter, and the slow unraveling of walls we didn't know we had built around ourselves. Each encounter left us both more entangled, hearts racing, yet tempered by the reality that this was dangerous territory. And yet, the strangest part was how natural it felt. Being near Julian, in spite of everything, was like standing in sunlight after years of shadow. Our conversations, once strictly about schoolwork or childcare, began to wander. He would ask about my dreams, my fears, the little things that made me who I am. And I, in turn, found myself confessing thoughts I had never shared with anyone. Somewhere between the late-night readings, the shared responsibilities, and the stolen moments of laughter, a bond formed. It was tender, electrifying, and entirely our own. A bond that neither of us had anticipated, but neither could deny. By the time the semester was fully underway, the dorm courtyard, the same place where chaos had first introduced us, had become a kind of sanctuary. Not because the world had changed, but because we had found each other within it, learning to navigate the storm together, learning that sometimes the most unexpected guardianships could lead to the most profound connections. And through it all, one undeniable truth emerged. Life, rules, and propriety might attempt to dictate our paths, but some bonds like ours were destined to be written differently, illuminated by moments of laughter, tenderness, and a love that grew quietly, but fiercely, against all odds. The following days settled into a rhythm that was chaotic but strangely comforting. Julian and I learned each other's habits without trying too hard. He always woke before dawn, showering and preparing for the day with military-like precision. I, on the other hand, thrived in the chaos of late nights, spilling coffee on papers I hadn't even read yet. Somehow we coexisted, bridging the gap between order and spontaneity. Our shared responsibility for the child became a lens through which we saw each other differently. Julian's sternness, which had once felt impenetrable, softened in small, unexpected ways. He had a natural way with children, a patience that revealed layers of him I had never suspected existed. There was a certain tenderness in how he kneeled to tie the child's shoelaces, or how he carefully listened to stories about playground adventures. And every time I watched, my chest twisted in a mix of admiration and longing. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dorm courtyard, I found Julian seated on the grass, legs stretched out, reading a book aloud to the child. The soft cadence of his voice, the flicker of a smile every time the child laughed, God, it was mesmerizing. I leaned against a nearby tree, pretending to check my phone, but really, I was stealing these moments. The image of him, so utterly human, so tender, became something I could no longer ignore. "You've been staring," Julian said without looking up, his voice calm, but not unkind. I jumped, fumbling to hide my phone behind my back. "You was just checking messages," I muttered, though my tone was far from convincing. He finally glanced at me, eyes narrowing slightly, a teasing edge in his gaze. "Sure, checking messages. That's what you call it." I felt heat rise to my cheeks and grinned, unable to resist his quiet amusement. "Fine. I was watching you. Happy?" Julian closed his book, the action deliberate, and for a moment, the space between us felt charged with electricity. "And what exactly are you seeing?" he asked, his tone soft but pointed, making me squirm. "Someone incredible," I admitted, surprising even myself. I expected him to scold me, remind me of boundaries, but instead, he just watched me with that inscrutable look, as if he were weighing whether to let this truth linger between us. The next few weeks were a series of stolen moments, small gestures that spoke louder than words. A hand brushing mine when passing snacks. A shared laugh over a ridiculous dorm rule. A late-night conversation about dreams, fears, and the absurdity of university life. Each instance deepened the tension, the longing, until it became impossible to deny. And then came the first real test. The university decided to hold a dorm-wide event, a mix of games, performances, and competitions designed to foster community. Julian and I were expected to supervise, of course, but the event itself was chaotic beyond imagination. Students ran around like wild animals, laughter and shouting blending into a cacophony that made me dizzy. I found Julian perched on a bench, clipboard in hand, trying to maintain some semblance of order. I slid next to him, hiding a grin. "You look ridiculous," I whispered, nodding toward the clipboard and his furrowed brow. He shot me a sharp glance, but I caught the corner of his mouth twitch an almost smile. "And you look ready to cause more trouble than the entire dorm combined," he replied, voice low. The truth was, I did feel ready. But the mischief I planned was innocent, just small ways to make him laugh, to break through the wall of discipline he carried everywhere. And somehow it worked. I nudged him gently, whispered jokes, and the stern professor became human, laughing softly, allowing himself to be pulled into the moment. It was during this chaos that I realized just how deeply I had fallen. Julian wasn't just a magnetic figure or an object of desire. He was someone I wanted to trust, someone I wanted to share my life with, someone whose presence alone could make the world feel lighter. But life has a way of reminding you that happiness is often temporary. One afternoon, as we were returning from a trip to the library with the child, we encountered an administrative complication. There had been an error in the guardianship system, and suddenly our responsibilities were being questioned. The university was threatening to reassign the child, citing protocol violations and risk of mismanagement. I felt a cold dread sink into my stomach. The thought of losing this tenuous but precious connection was unbearable. Julian's usual calm faltered for the first time in my presence. His hands tightened around the child's small shoulder, and his jaw set with determination. "We won't let them take him," he said firmly, turning to me. "Not if I have anything to do with it." I nodded, my own resolve hardening. "We'll fight it. Together." It wasn't easy. The university bureaucracy was relentless, cold, and impersonal. But we navigated it together, our bond growing stronger with each obstacle. Late nights were spent poring over paperwork, strategizing, and sometimes just sitting together in silence, letting the weight of the day settle around us. And in those silences, the line between guardianship and something more blurred. A hand would brush against mine while reaching for a pen. Eyes would meet across a table, holding unspoken promises. Each fleeting touch, each shared glance, made the air between us electric, impossible to ignore. One night, after a particularly grueling day, we found ourselves alone in the dorm lounge again. The child was asleep, sprawled across a couch, exhausted from the day's excitement. Julian sank into a chair, exhaling deeply. I don't know how we're going to manage all of this, he admitted, voice low. The system, the rules, everything feels like it's working against us. I moved closer, sliding into the chair next to him. Maybe we stop thinking about rules for a moment, I whispered. Just us. Julian's eyes met mine, and the usual wall of professionalism cracked just enough to let me see the man beneath, the man who cared, who worried, who felt as deeply as I did. And in that moment we crossed a line we could never uncross. His hand found mine, fingers intertwining naturally, as if they had always belonged together. The warmth of his touch, the steady rhythm of his pulse, made my heart race. I've wanted this, to be close to you, for longer than I care to admit, he confessed, voice barely above a whisper. I smiled, unable to hide my own relief and longing. Me too, I admitted, more than I should. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of secrecy and openness, tension and tenderness. We navigated our feelings carefully, aware of the boundaries yet unable to resist the pull between us. The child, blissfully unaware of the romantic undertones of our relationship, became an unwitting witness to our growing intimacy, our quiet conversations, shared laughter, and the comfort of stolen moments in the dorm's quiet corners. There were challenges, of course. Rumors spread among students, small misunderstandings arose, and the weight of secrecy pressed on us. But each obstacle only strengthened our resolve. We learned to communicate without words, to understand each other's moods and needs intuitively. And in those moments, when the world outside seemed overwhelming, we found solace in each other. One evening, as autumn leaves fell gently around the courtyard, Julian and I sat on the steps of the dorm, the child playing nearby. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of earth and decay, yet the warmth between us was undeniable. You know, Julian said softly, resting his head against mine, I never thought I'd find this someone who makes the chaos bearable, someone who makes me feel alive. I pressed my forehead to his, heart full. I feel the same way. You make even the hardest days worth it. And in that simple moment, surrounded by falling leaves and the quiet hum of the dorm, we realized that what we had was more than guardianship. More than attraction, it was a connection that transcended rules, expectations, and circumstance. A bond that, no matter the challenges ahead, would endure. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of emotions. Julian and I had settled into a rhythm of secret glances and fleeting touches, navigating the precarious balance between professionalism and desire. But life, as always, seemed determined to test us. The first major challenge came in the form of the university's official guardianship review. Administrators arrived unannounced one rainy afternoon, umbrellas dripping water across the polished floors of our dorm. Their presence was intimidating, their expressions cold and impersonal. We're here to ensure compliance with the guardianship protocols, the lead administrator announced. It has come to our attention that there may have been lapses in supervision and adherence to system guidelines. I felt my stomach drop. Julian's jaw tightened, his hands clasped behind his back, betraying a tension he rarely allowed to surface. The child, sensing the unease, clung to my leg, wide-eyed. I assure you, Julian said, his voice calm but firm, we have followed every requirement. Any deviation was minor and has been addressed immediately. The administrators exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. I could see the frustration behind Julian's composure, the strain of maintaining order in the face of bureaucratic scrutiny. As the review dragged on, I found myself stealing glances at him. Even in this tense moment, there was a quiet strength about Julian that drew me in. His eyes, sharp and piercing, softened whenever he looked at the child or me, revealing the depth of his care and dedication. After what felt like hours, the administrators finally concluded their inspection, nodding curtly before departing. Julian exhaled, a sound of relief that made my chest ache. I reached out, brushing a damp strand of hair from his forehead, and he didn't pull away. See, I whispered, teasingly. Nothing to worry about. He allowed a small, tight-lipped smile, but his eyes held a storm of emotion, pride, exhaustion, and something I couldn't quite name. I knew, without words, that he appreciated my presence, my support. That quiet acknowledgement, fleeting as it was, meant everything. The tension of the review didn't vanish immediately. Over the following days, the shadow of bureaucracy lingered, making every small gesture between us feel charged, every touch meaningful. And yet, amidst the pressure, our bond grew stronger. We learned to read each other's signals instinctively, to communicate through subtle expressions and fleeting touches. One evening, after the child had fallen asleep, Julian and I found ourselves alone in the dorm's small kitchen. The air was warm with the scent of freshly baked cookies, an attempt at comfort after the stressful review. We moved around each other with an ease that contrasted sharply with the tension outside, our movements synchronized without thought. "You're impossible," Julian muttered, though the corner of his mouth betrayed a smirk. "I prefer the term charmingly chaotic," I replied, sliding a cookie onto his plate. He glanced at me, eyebrows raised. "Chaotic is an understatement." I grinned, and in that moment, the world outside seemed to vanish. The kitchen became a private sanctuary, a space where rules and expectations held no power. Our hands brushed as we reached for the same utensil, and neither of us pulled away. Instead, the touch lingered, a silent acknowledgement of the desire that had been building for weeks. "Do you ever think about us?" I asked, voice low, almost afraid of the answer. Julian's gaze met mine, unwavering, intense. "Every day," he admitted, the words barely above a whisper. "And I've thought about how impossible it feels. And yet, how inevitable." The vulnerability in his eyes struck me. For someone so composed, so disciplined, Julian was revealing a depth of feeling that both terrified and thrilled me. I reached out, taking his hand, feeling the warmth of his skin, the steady strength of his grip. "We'll figure it out," I said softly. "Together." And in that moment, the world outside, the university, the guardianship system, the chaos of dorm life faded into irrelevance. There was only us, intertwined in a fragile, beautiful connection that defied logic and circumstance. The following days were a delicate dance. We maintained appearances, keeping our relationship carefully concealed from the prying eyes of students and faculty. Yet, in private moments, our intimacy grew deeper. Shared meals, late-night walks, and quiet conversations became the fabric of our lives. Each interaction, no matter how small, reinforced the bond that had formed between us. But life has a way of testing even the strongest connections. One afternoon, as Julian and I were walking through the campus gardens with the child, a rumor reached USA student had spotted us in a compromising position, and whispers were spreading quickly. I felt my stomach twist, fear and frustration mingling. Julian's hand tightened around mine, a silent reassurance. "Ignore them," he said quietly. "We know the truth." But ignoring it wasn't easy. The rumor grew, fueled by gossip and speculation, threatening to expose the delicate balance we had worked so hard to maintain. Julian and I retreated into the safety of our shared spaces, focusing on the child and our private moments of connection. Yet, the tension was palpable, a constant undercurrent that made every glance and touch feel like a risk. One night, as the campus fell silent under a blanket of stars, Julian and I sat on the dorm rooftop, the child asleep inside. The city lights twinkled below, distant and serene, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions swirling between us. "I don't care what anyone says," Julian whispered, breaking the silence. "I'm done hiding how I feel." I turned to him, heart racing. "Neither am I." And then, as if the universe itself had decided to grant us a moment of reprieve, Julian leaned in, capturing my lips in a kiss that was both tender and urgent. It was a release of weeks of longing, frustration, and unspoken desire. The world around us ceased to exist. There were no rules, no whispers, no fears. Only the warmth of each other, the intensity of a connection that had grown beyond words. From that night onward, our relationship became a quiet rebellion against the constraints that had once defined us. We moved with caution in public, careful to protect our secret, Yet in private, our intimacy flourished. Shared mornings, late-night confessions, and gentle touches became the rhythm of our days. The child, blissfully unaware of the romantic tension between us, continued to be a source of joy and grounding. Watching Julian interact with him soft, patient, and wholly present only deepened my admiration and love for him. There was a tenderness in those moments that transcended the boundaries of romance, a glimpse into the man behind the stern professor. As the semester progressed, we faced challenges, both from within the university and from our own insecurities. There were days of doubt, of fear that our connection could be discovered or misinterpreted. But each obstacle we overcame strengthened our bond. We learned to trust each other completely, to communicate without words, and to find solace in the quiet moments we shared. One afternoon, as autumn turned to winter, Julian and I found ourselves sitting by the fireplace in the dorm lounge, the child playing nearby. The room was warm, filled with the comforting scent of burning wood and the soft crackle of flames. "I never imagined this," Julian said softly, resting his head against mine. "I never imagined finding someone who could make the chaos of life feel meaningful." I smiled, feeling a swell of emotion. "I feel the same way. You make everything better." He looked at me, eyes shining with an intensity that took my breath away. "Then let's promise each other something," he said, his voice firm yet tender. "No matter what happens, we face it together. Always." I nodded, overwhelmed by the depth of feeling in his gaze. "Always," I echoed. In that quiet moment, surrounded by the warmth of firelight and the presence of the child who had unknowingly brought us together, I realized that we had found something rare and precious. A connection that defied expectation, a love that thrived despite obstacles, a partnership that was unbreakable. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to believe in happiness not fleeting or conditional, but real, enduring, and ours. Winter deepened over the campus, frosting windows and blanketing the dorm courtyard in a delicate layer of white. The world outside was cold, harsh, and unyielding, but inside, Julian and I had carved out a space that was our swarm, intimate, and safe. The guardianship responsibilities continued, of course, but they no longer felt like a burden. The child's laughter, the small victories in homework or bedtime routines, became shared triumphs that bonded the three of us in ways no rules could dictate. And Julian, he was no longer just the strict professor or the co-guardian. He was my partner in everything, my anchor in the storm of university life, and the one person who could make the chaos feel like home. One evening, after a particularly snow-heavy day, we found ourselves trudging back from the grocery store with bags of food and hot cocoa. The child, bundled in layers of winter clothes, ran ahead, leaving us in a quiet trail of footprints. I glanced at Julian, his scarf wrapped tightly around his neck, snowflakes catching in his hair. "You know," I said, voice soft, "I never imagined that our lives would end up like this. Chaotic, yes, but also perfect." Julian looked at me, eyes warm, and smiled. "Perfect isn't the word I would have used," he replied. "But it's ours. And that makes it perfect enough." We shared a quiet laugh, the tension of previous weeks dissipating into the snowy night. The world felt distant, unimportant, and for the first time in months, I felt completely at peace. The next days brought small joys that cemented our bond. Snowball fights with the child in the courtyard, baking cookies together in the dorm kitchen, and late-night storytelling sessions by the fireplace. Julian's laughter, usually reserved and measured, came freely in these moments, and every time I heard it, my heart swelled with love and admiration. One night, after the child had fallen asleep, Julian and I lingered in the lounge, the fire casting warm flickers across his face. He reached for my hand, fingers entwining with mine naturally, as if it had always belonged there. "I was thinking," he said quietly, "about how much has changed, how much we've changed, and yet, how right this feels." I squeezed his hand, leaning closer. "It feels like we were meant to find each other," I admitted. "Even through all the chaos, all the rules, all the complications." Julian smiled softly, a rare vulnerability shining through. I don't care about the complications anymore. Care about you, about us, about this. He gestured between us, and I understood. The intimacy, the love, the unspoken promise of a future together. And in that moment, something shifted. No longer was our love hidden, precarious, or fleeting. It became a quiet certainty, a grounding truth in a world that could otherwise feel unpredictable and unkind. The following weeks were filled with subtle declarations of that certainty. Morning kisses before classes, shared meals with the child, quiet moments on the rooftop watching the stars, hands always finding each other without question. We celebrated small victories, an A on a difficult exam, the child learning to ride a bike without training wheels, and comforted each other in moments of stress or doubt. Even the dorm staff, who had once been rigid and scrutinizing, seemed to accept the unspoken partnership that had formed. Julian and I navigated our roles with care, balancing guardianship responsibilities with the growing intimacy between us. And the child, our unexpected connector, thrived in the warmth and stability we provided. One evening, as spring began to whisper its way across campus, Julian suggested a walk through the courtyard. The snow had melted, replaced by the first green shoots of new life. Flowers peeked through the grass, and the air was crisp but fragrant with promise. We walked side by side, fingers brushing occasionally, and I felt the weight of the past months lift. The fear, the rumors, the bureaucratic scrutiny, all of it seemed distant now, irrelevant in the face of what we had built together. Do you ever think about what comes next? I asked quietly, glancing at him. He took a deep breath, his expression thoughtful. I think about us, about how we navigate the rest of our lives together. And I know, no matter what comes, we'll face it side by side. I smiled, heart full. Side by side, I echoed, feeling the truth of it in every fiber of my being. The child ran ahead, giggling, and we followed, laughter mingling with the gentle spring breeze. Julian slipped his arm around my shoulders, pulling me close, and I rested my head against him, feeling the warmth of his body and the steady rhythm of his heart. It was ordinary and yet extraordinary. A quiet, profound contentment that made all the struggles of the past months worthwhile. In the weeks that followed, we established a routine that balanced guardianship, academics, and our relationship. We became a Unit 3 individuals bound by love, responsibility, and shared experiences. The dorm courtyard, once a place of chaos and uncertainty, became a sanctuary of laughter, growth, and connection. One sunny afternoon, as we sat on a bench watching students pass by, Julian turned to me, eyes serious but soft. I've been thinking about the future, he said, his voice low, intimate. About how much I want you in it. Not just now, not just here, but always. My breath caught. Julian, I began, but he placed a finger gently on my lips, silencing me. No words yet, he whispered. Just know that I mean it. Every day, every moment, I mean it. I nodded, tears welling in my eyes, not of sadness, but of overwhelming gratitude and love. I know, I said softly, and I feel the same, more than anything. From that day forward, our love was no longer tentative or hidden. It was lived openly in the quiet corners of dorm life, in the shared routines of guardianship, and in the laughter-filled moments that defined our days. Each kiss, each touch, each whispered confession solidified a bond that had survived scrutiny, chaos, and doubt. The child, ever perceptive, seemed to understand the depth of our connection without needing words. He laughed more freely, slept more soundly, and thrived in the warmth of a household filled with love. Watching Julian interact with him, patient, playful, and nurturing, only deepened my admiration for the man I loved. Spring turned into summer, and the university year came to a close. Graduation approached, not just for the students but for the chapters we had navigated together. Julian and I stood on the steps of the dorm one warm evening, watching the sun set over the campus we had come to love. I never imagined it would end like this, I said softly, leaning against him. Neither did I, Julian admitted, wrapping an arm around me. But I wouldn't change a thing. Not the chaos, not the struggles, not the fears. All of it led us here to this. I rested my head on his shoulder, feeling the steady warmth of his body, the certainty of his presence. To this, I echoed, heart full, knowing that the journey we had shared, the laughter, the tears, the challenges had forged something unbreakable. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the courtyard. The air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers and the promise of new beginnings. And in that quiet, perfect moment, Julian and I knew that no matter what the future held, we had found our place, our love, and our family. With a gentle squeeze of my hand, Julian whispered, "Always together." "Always?" I replied, feeling the weight of those simple words that carried the promise of a lifetime. And so, amidst the dorms, the university chaos, and the unexpected responsibilities that had first brought us together, we found something rare and enduring. A love that was tender, passionate, and unwavering. A bond that transcended circumstance, rules, and expectation. A connection that, once discovered, would never fade. As the stars began to shimmer in the evening sky, we stood together, hand in hand, hearts intertwined, and watched the world move around us. And for the first time in a long time, I truly knew that everything, no matter how unpredictable, had led us to this. A quiet, steadfast, and perfect happiness. We walked back to the dorm, the child running ahead, laughter trailing in the air. Julian's arm was around my shoulders, my hand in his, and the warmth between us was more than physical. It was the comfort of knowing we had each other, against all odds, for all time. And in that moment, beneath the stars and amidst the lingering scent of spring, we smiled, hearts full, knowing that our story, unexpected, chaotic, and beautiful, had only just begun. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe to get notifications about next videos.